Good day, everyone. My name is Ramil, and I will discuss the impact of COVID-19 on the Ashen response to climate change. According to a report released by Global Climate Risk Index that was compiled by German Watch, an environmental group, since the 1960s, there is an increase in the average temperature of Southeast Asia for every decade. Out of 10 countries in the world listed as vulnerable to this crisis, 4 Asian countries are on the list, namely Vietnam, Myanmar, Thailand, and the Philippines. This presentation will be divided into three parts. For part 1, I will briefly discuss global warming, climate change, and the greenhouse effect, as well as the problems that we aim to answer after this presentation. For part 2, I will discuss the initiatives done by Ashen, the pre-pandemic efforts of Ashen to address climate change, as well as the efforts of Ashen during pandemic. For the last part, I will give my overall feedback and conclusion to the initiatives presented in this presentation. The objective of this presentation is to give an overview of the efforts of ASEAN to the climate change crisis on pre-pandemic and pandemic setup. After this presentation, we must be able to understand the effects of climate change on the international security and how proactive ASEAN is in resolving the issue. Global warming has been observed way back in the pre-industrial period where people were primarily into fossil burning. Due to human activities, the average temperature increased by 1 degree Celsius and it is increasing by zero point 0.2 degrees Celsius per decade. Scientists concluded that global leaders and stakeholders must be aware of its warming and make sure to limit the warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius to avoid further devastating effects such as extreme drought, tropical storms, and other disasters. Southeast Asia could suffer so much than other regions in the world, according to Asian Development Bank. This could affect the key sectors such as agriculture, tourism, fishing, human health, and labor productivity. The hotter the temperature could also trigger the emergence of tropical diseases such as malaria and dengue fever. Climate change pertains to the change of weather patterns, increase in sea level caused by melting of ice sheets and glaciers. It could lead to a serious threat to life as it triggers widespread flooding and extreme weather. Southeast Asia is vulnerable to climate change since most of the livelihood of the people relies on agriculture, natural resources, and forestry. In a study conducted by Asian Development Bank from 1951 to 2000, there is an increase of zero point 0.1 to zero point 0.3 in the temperature in the region per decade. Sea levels also increase by 1 to 3 millimeters per year. In line with these changes, this may result in intense calamities. The study also projects that there might be a 70 centimeters rise in sea level that may result in major problem in many Asian coast cities, namely Jakarta, Bangkok, and Manila. The greenhouse is a natural process that warms the Earth's surface. This was identified by scientists in 1896. It warms the planet to 15 degrees Celsius that keeps the Earth livable. However, the excessive burning of fossil fuels amps up the natural greenhouse effect, and it alters the planet's climate system. 30% of the solar energy is reflected in space, while the remaining 70% passes through the atmosphere to the Earth's surface and is absorbed by the land, ocean, and the atmosphere. Now that we know the focus of this presentation, I will now walk you through the problems that this presentation aims to answer. First, the presentation aims to identify the efforts of ASEAN in response to climate change. What is the level of priority of climate change to the ASEAN? And how does climate change affect the international security of ASEAN? Ashen may not be the primary source of emission of greenhouse gases, but it could be highly affected by climate change Since the majority of the resources of the people and the economy relies on agriculture, natural resources, forestry, and coastlines. Asian member states has taken initial actions to address this issue through different environmental, economic, and social activities. By 2020, the goal is for Indonesia to reduce its emission by 26%, Malaysia by 40%, the Philippines by 20%, and Singapore by 16%. The Ashen leaders expressed common understanding towards a global solution to the problem and issued declarations and statements last 2007, 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2014. Section D10 of the Asian Socio-Cultural Community or ASCC Blueprint from 2009 to 2015 tackles the respondents to climate change and how to address its impact on socioeconomic, health, and environment. The first goal of Section D10 is to encourage every member to have a common understanding of climate change, and it aims to eventually develop Asian Climate Change Initiative. The third goal is to develop and facilitate the exchange of information that will help us identify the best practices and mitigation in fighting climate change. The goal is to encourage the stakeholders to actively participate in afforestation and reforestation and promote awareness of negative effects of climate change. The Asian member states, or AMS, and other partners must proactively collaborate in addressing climate change and create a systematic observation system that will help monitor the effects in the vulnerable areas of Ashen. The creation of scientific studies that will help facilitate the implementation of climate change conventions and promote awareness and advocacies that would help the people to participate should also be imposed. The local government, private sectors, NGOs, and the community should also help in discussing the impacts of climate change. AMS leaders should also formulate and promote strategies that are economically vibrant and environment friendly. In 2009, the ASEAN Working Group on Climate Change, or AWGCC, was established. The group monitors the implementation of relevant action lines in the ASCC blueprint. In 2012, an action plan on joint response to climate change was developed. Here are the pre-pandemic efforts of ASEAN in addressing climate change. The rehabilitation and sustainable use of peatland forest in Southeast Asia. This campaign focuses on uplifting the dreadful conditions of peatlands. It institutes ways on how to properly facilitate and rehabilitate. Biodiversity and climate change. This campaign aims to amplify approaches and instruments for biodiversity as well as climate change. The workshop and exchange on climate resilient cities, identifying the best practices. This was held last January 18 to 19, 2011 in Jakarta, Indonesia. Representatives of AMS exchanged strategies and experiences that would help them in the current and future impacts of climate change. The workshops on risks and impacts from extreme events of floods and droughts in Southeast Asian countries. This was held last June 9 to 10, 2010 in Indonesia and last September 22 to 23, 2010 in Thailand. This reviews the resilience of AMS in flood and drought management, and it covers collective preparedness and exchange of good practices that worked in providing solutions in drought management. The ASEAN Plus She Youth Environment Forum, Creating a Climate for Change. This project is part of the implementation plan of the ASEAN Environment Education Plan and was held in Brunei Darussalam last April 22 to 25, 2010. It aims to tap the youth in to the issues of climate change. The Ashen Environmentally Sustainable Development Film Festival changed the climate change. This was held in Cambodia last October 18, 2011. This unique and creative project aims to promote awareness and importance of multi-stakeholder participation of the Asian countries in addressing climate change. Ashen India Expert Meeting on Regional Program of Climate Change. This was held in India last June 27 to 29, 2012. This project aims to develop frameworks and exchange ways on how to address climate change. The Jakarta City Greenhouse Gases Emissions and Heat Plus Launch and Training, a two-day event held in Indonesia last September 20 to 21, 2012. This project discussed gas emissions and introduced platforms that will help monitor emissions. This would help AMS to adopt a systematic approach to monitoring and measuring carbon emissions. Ashen Action Plan on Joint Response to Climate Change. The joint response to AMS leaders recognizing the vulnerability of Ashen in climate change. The Climate Leadership Academy on Urban Climate Adaptation for Cities in Southeast Asia. This was held in Jakarta, Indonesia last August 13 to 15, 2013. The project between the United States and Asian member states that aims to provide knowledge and practical solutions related to climate adaptation. The last initiative of ASEAN in addressing climate change was held last October 7, 2021. The ASEAN conducted the State of Climate Change Report. The Climate Change Report plans to give an overview of the state of the climate in the region. The framework of the report is designed to educate and guide the ASEAN member states to climate change targets, and the action plan constitutes an important milestone on the ASEAN's climate vision for 2030 up to 2050. The report tackled and focuses on the challenges in the ASEAN region, as well as the continuing duty and support of ASEAN to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change and Paris Agreement. The ASEAN is also developing the sixth ASEAN State of Environment Report. This report is expected to be a comprehensive review of the state of the environment as well as the initiatives done in addressing the concerns. Hopefully, it would give us insights and suggestions on the trajectory of ASEAN in the emerging environmental challenges and address problems and opportunities of the region's recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. The Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air conducted a research during this pandemic that focuses on carbon emission. In Thailand, due to limited transportation, there is a double decrease in carbon monoxide emission. There is also a significant drop in the production of nitrogen dioxide in Kuala Lumpur, Manila, Singapore, and Bangkok. According to an article by Stefan Lenny of Carnegie Europe, COVID-19 is genuinely a global health emergency, but climate change is a greater and more complex global challenge. According to John Cadham of Relief Web, human activities are contributing to climate change are also contributing not only to the emergence of new diseases but also its spread. As climate change intensifies, the chances of interaction of humans and other animals are getting higher. This may result in health crises just like what we are experiencing now. According to Deacon Pinner, Matt Rogers, and Hamid Jamdari of McKinsey.com, climate change triggers the emergence of a pandemic based on the studies conducted by Stanford University. One of the notable examples cited is the rise in the temperature could trigger the spread of mosquitoes and may result to diseases such as malaria and dengue fever. Another example cited is the shortening supplies The shortening of supply chains may lead to substituting animal proteins to plant proteins will most likely help in mitigating the risk of pandemic. The authors also emphasize that pandemic and climate risk have a lot of similarities that might affect the socioeconomic, production, and the safety of the people. Thus, it requires plans that is good with short-term performance and long-term resilience. Unlike public health, climate change is gradual, cumulative, and distribute dangers that was manifested over time. The article also pointed out that, that acknowledging the similarities and differences of pandemic and climate change is a critical step in deriving to practical and feasible solutions. Climate change could also threaten the security of the people since it affects the livelihood and the habitat and will have a great impact on the basic needs of the people, population, and the national security. The question here is what should we do now? Ashen has always been active in addressing climate change, but I genuinely believe that actions are way better than simply addressing the issue. We should not wait for it to happen and make sure to make an immediate and feasible actions now. Utilizing telenetworking and other digital platforms could help in reducing the transportation demand and emission. Listening to scientists could also be a great help in resolving the problem. Asian member states should also take initiatives in their respective countries since the citizens' livelihood are greatly affected by climate change. Creation of climate risk models to analyze the situation on climate change could be a great help. Updating the current efforts to a new ones and building sustainable renewable energy could be a good step. The battle towards the end of climate change may be a very long fight, but taking steps right now will have a great impact in the future. We must learn our lesson from the coronavirus pandemic and make sustainable, economical, and environmental friendly solutions before it's too late. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation, and I hope you learn a lot.